What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to the 32nd episode of the Counting Pixelated Sheep podcast for the month of March. God, no, we're already in April. Fuck.
Yeah.
This last month has gone by a little bit faster for me because I've been starting to pick up in my new career that I was actually able to start. But yes, for the month of April 2018, I am joined as always by my partner in crime and co-host for the show, Sirjohnmac.
Hello.
And today, the articles that we have for you will be as follows. Specialized Raspberry Pi developed and coded for Twitch streaming, and Warhammer developer under fire after promising 90-hour work week crunch. As well as we will have a channel showcase, and finishing off with Where Are They Now, and possibly some rambling depending on what do we want to talk about. But let's dive straight into the first article, which is the Raspberry Pi. So this was actually very interesting to find. Excuse me. So what this is let me pull up the article. I forget the guy's name, but it was on hackster.io, which I guess is a do-it-yourself kind of website. Tinkernut is the name of the user. I knew it was something like that, but I couldn't remember the exact. But anyways, what he did is he created a kit, basically. Relatively affordable kit, relatively low cost of effort, as well as cost in general, kit to stream on Twitch for anything that has an HDMI hookup, which would be a computer and a good amount of consoles. I don't know if the Switch also has an HDMI port. I wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't as well, because Nintendo. But what this does is it hooks up, basically the Raspberry Pi itself is coded so that it can hook up to your Twitch channel. Basically, with the press of a button, it takes the HDMI input and plugs it into your Twitch server, and obviously you can stream from there. The interesting thing about this is that it really only takes about 4 hours to set up, including putting up the code, which I'm assuming is more or less just copy and paste and then fill in certain parts to tell it to similar to OBS when you tell it your Twitch streaming passcode thing, the server key, that's what it's called, so that it knows where to stream to. And unfortunately, the article itself doesn't have a cost to this, but I can imagine that is dependent on what you want to put into your Raspberry Pi. If you want to put a beefier graphics card and processor and RAM, then I can imagine that would probably be more costly, especially with the whole Bitcoin mining things nowadays. But that's discussion for probably never, since I can't imagine how we'd ever connect that to gaming.
Yeah.
But anyways, this is supposedly just a beta version. There's probably going to be more streamlined code, probably help the streaming itself be faster later down the line, less encoding and whatnot. And Tinkernut has dubbed this the Twitch-O-Matic. Although I can imagine that if you were good enough at coding, you could probably look at that code and then make it stream on any platform, whether it be YouTube, obviously, but what's the other one? TV.me or something like that?
There are a bunch of them, and I don't know the names of any of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. But either way, I thought this was an interesting little article because this could potentially allow for basically anyone and everyone to stream any kind of game, because what you're doing is you're taking the stress and strain off of your computer and putting it onto effectively another computer, one that's hooked into your computer, but still, it's essentially an overglorified and slightly overpowered graphics card. Or, not graphics card, capture card. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Except it has its own operating system, more or less. And I feel like I'm kind of shocked that I hadn't heard about this too much before. I've heard of some people doing similar things to this, but this is such a simple idea that it would effectively allow for anyone to stream any kind of game. For example, I can't really play Overwatch, mostly because of my internet connection, also because Overwatch is terribly optimized. I can play Overwatch fine, but if I have OBS running and Overwatch, it just kind of goes to shit. It's inconsistent. I get like 150 ping, which I don't mind that much, but like the FPS is the part that really kills me. I can't get more than like 30 to 40 FPS, which I just can't deal with. It's like I really need at least 60 consistently. And when it's, and I can normally get that. Normally I get like 80, 90, and then it'll drop at lowest to like 60, 50 maybe. But I can still deal with 50 if it's, that's when like everyone's popping their ultimates, for example. But this is a very interesting concept, and I can imagine, depending on the cost, obviously, if this requires like a really strong like graphics card and stuff, so the machine itself would cost $400 or $500, and maybe not because that's on top of another computer, but if it only costs like $100-$200 or maybe even less than $100, depending on how much you can get away with. I don't exactly know how much just streaming would require in terms of like RAM and processing power and whatnot. I know what it has combined, like with playing games like Overwatch, but I think this would potentially, this concept at the very least, maybe not this specific machine and the code involved with it, because the code I think is the big one, but it could potentially revolutionize the Twitch platform by allowing basically anyone with even a moderate PC to, or console, in which case go for it, but it'd allow for them to basically stream, anyone and everyone to stream effectively any game that they own, which I know is a big problem, mostly with like Overwatch, for example. Go ahead.
I definitely think the price point is like the most important part of this, because like if you're gonna get a normal capture card like an Elgato or whatever they're using nowadays, it's like you're looking at like at least $50, 100, 150 if you want something good. And for a lot of people, that's, I mean, especially if you're using if that would be money that you could just put towards a better graphics card that would allow you to do all that stuff, then why not just do that and forgo the external capture device entirely?
Yeah.
But I'm looking at this thing, all the like individual components, it's like less than $20.
Really?
Yeah, like the Pi Zero itself is like 10.
Yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know. I haven't like clicked on the video or anything. There's a video linked to the article as well. Does it have any sort of graphics processing, or is it just using the base computers?
It just seems to be using the processing power of the Pi itself.
Okay. I guess that's fair, because you're not really processing the game itself. You're processing the stream, which doesn't, like, it does take a little bit, but not very much. In terms of processing power, like a processor, does it have its own processor, or is it, again, just using the inherent Pis?
It seems like from the components list, and I'm a bit of a layman when it comes to this, it seems like the Pi is doing all the processing, and all the extra stuff is, like, all the other stuff is just to connect it and, like, get the HDMI signal to the Pi. Yeah, honestly, if this can do the job of, like, one of those $100 capture cards at $20 plus a little elbow crease, that's really cool.
Yeah. That's actually interesting, but it does bring up a question I've had for a long-ass time, is like how much... Because streaming itself, especially with OBS, for example, is finicky as all hell. Like, it can just decide to screw up one day, and it could be perfectly fine the next, you know? So, I wonder if this is enough to stabilize that instability, you know? Or if you do still need a like, pretty high-quality computer to stream anything you want. From the sound of the article itself and the way they're putting it, it sounds like it's making it possible to stream anything you want, so maybe it does take away that finickiness, but I guess you just have to like try it out for yourself, in which case, I mean, find the nearest Raspberry Pi and like an extra board and copy and paste the code and follow the instructions, which supposedly takes about 4 hours, according to this guy. So if you're inexperienced with that, it might take a little bit more, but depending on the results and, you know, the cost itself, if it is just a base Raspberry Pi, like John said, it'll only be like $20. So might be worth it. In which case, we might be seeing a lot of small to medium-sized Twitch streamers moving over to using those to keep the strain off of their systems. Be interesting. Granted, I don't watch Twitch anyways, so it doesn't really affect me, but I think it's cool nonetheless. Anything that affects the overall content creation community, I try to keep an eye on. You want to move on to the second article, Todd?
Yeah, sure.
So this is Warhammer 40k, I believe. Yeah, Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr. The developer has been under fire from fans recently because they posted a supposed joke where they didn't meet a deadline that they had set for themselves for some sort of DLC or update or something. So they said, oh, we're going to have, where's the actual quote? I can't find the actual quote anymore, but it was basically saying they're going to work 90-hour work weeks to meet the deadline by like next month or something like that, sometime in the near future. That was added on top of an apology where they didn't meet the deadline, obviously. And that caused a lot of fans to be concerned for the development team and say, like, they don't need to, and in fact, the fans don't want them to work inhumane hours just to get something out. They'd rather wait and not end up killing someone from stress. And hours later, Neocore, the developer, basically made a bunch of statements saying like that was a joke, blah blah blah, except the unfortunate thing is that a lot of, like, Neocore has already gone on record in the past with a lot of employees coming forward saying that they do in fact do the crunch period. I believe this is something that's been like relatively researched. It might have been something that we talked about in the past, I don't remember. It might have been like a long time ago. I vaguely recall there might have been a Jimquisition episode on it. I believe Total Biscuit did a I will now talk about for X amount of minutes video on it. Like, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. I remember vaguely being in the early years of college, and this particular topic was the hot topic for about a month. And a lot of the workers have in the past come forward and said that they already will do like 80-hour work weeks, which, that's twice the normal work week for, at least for America. I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but 80-hour work week is pretty crazy. And then that all culminated in Neocore, specifically some of the higher-ups, eventually responding to Polygon, the specific authors of this article, saying that they basically, like, saving face, saying like, oh, we pay our people overtime, they don't have to if they don't want to, and there's no problem with management if they don't. But they do have a lot of people on average, their employees work 11 and a half extra hours per week. Which that's a significant amount, but I guess if they are getting paid for it, and they do want to, and they're not getting punished if they don't, then I suppose it's alright. And it is worth saying that, despite any skepticism, there is no proof of people being punished for overtime-related incidents, like not taking overtime and, not wanting to work extra hours beyond the 40. But a lot of people did. A lot of workers from the company have said that they do work overtime, but none of them have actually said that they're forced to or anything like that, and that they don't get paid for the extra overtime. So there is that. You think that would sort of come out in the same breath if it was that sort of problem?
Yeah. I just think it's like, even if it is a joke that's like a stupid joke to make because of how many studios employ ridiculous hours for like crunch time.
Yeah.
I found an article about a survey that the International Game Developers Association did, and more than 76% of video game industry professionals report work weeks periodically exceeding 40 hours, aka crunch time.
Yeah, that's one thing that even this article touches on, where it says, like, there's been a movement, I think since a couple of years ago when, like, those crunch articles that I was talking about came out, where the movement has been to get some sort of union for game developers, because it's incredibly common for game devs to work overtime. Like, very few of them ever admit to, like, oh yeah, no, I don't work overtime. It's usually incredibly common, and it's nice and all if it's not mandatory and they just want to do it to, get the product out there. But there are some companies, some AAA companies, that have been known to have inhumane amounts of overtime that are mandatory, that they'll, be basically put on a shit list if they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to subtly... was trying to be subtle about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
EA in particular is by far the biggest developer that would do, like, irrational amounts of crunch time, I believe, for not the most recent Assassin's Creed, but the Assassin's Creed before this one. They had a lot of issues with crunch time. And I believe if we did talk about it on a podcast like a year or two ago, it was probably about an Assassin's Creed game. Have anything to say? I heard you breathe in.
Just should have linked this article, but, like, basically, even, like, if you are in crunch time, like, 89% of the professionals who did work crunch time, 89% said they didn't receive, like, paid overtime or anything like that. And that...
Depending on... there are some issues with that, like, in particular, some companies, they have to approve overtime beforehand. It's just so, like, for example, the company I work for, they have to approve overtime, and they're not necessarily a large company. I think there's just more so that they don't, overpay, than, like, have a loss in profits for a certain amount of time, And that's reasonable, because it's like, they don't really expect you to work overtime. I've never really seen anyone work overtime. But it's like, you know, if you had to for some reason, or you wanted to just to get extra money, you could have that arranged. Whereas I think some of these larger companies like EA could potentially take advantage of that and be like, well, you need to get this done by this period of time, and we're not going to approve any overtime, you know? So it turns into like, well, technically they do offer overtime, but they haven't approved it because, you know, whatever reason. And it's very hard to get out of that, because it's generally in the employment contract that you understand that term of the employment. And short of, you know, taking the company you work for to court, it's very hard to fight that. And, you know, in which case, like, you better have another job lined up, because if you sue the company you work for, it's not going to be too good.
Yeah.
So I think one big way to fix that would actually be to have a union for game devs. Like, unions can go too far and create issues in certain professions, but I think in this particular case, the non-existence of a union is more harmful than the opposite at this moment in time for the game developers.
Yeah.
Because no one seems to have their back other than the consumer, and the consumer can't really do much. You know, they can try, but they're not really going to force. They're not going to have a good ground to stand on to tell companies like EA and Ubisoft and Activision and God knows who else how to treat their employees. You know.
Yeah, like, at the end of the day, you vote with your dollar.
Yeah.
And, like, it's... If people don't even, like, really... Or a lot of consumers don't follow through on all the boycotts against, like, Ubisoft and EA, then what chance is there for this?
Yeah. Especially when it doesn't affect the consumer side of things, because they get the game regardless of, you know, whether it comes out now or 3 months from now. They get the game in effectively the same state.
Actually, I mean, it might be small things, but I think it actually does affect the end product.
It definitely does, but not in a noticeable way that the average consumer would notice. You know, people like you and me, or, you know, game critics like, you know, like Jim Sterling, like Total Biscuit. We know because we try to be educated about that sort of stuff. And there are plenty of people that do, but not compared to the millions upon millions upon millions of people that don't.
Yeah.
You know, that's like worrying about how their game devs are treated is absolute bottom of the list of their concerns, you know?
Yeah.
So, I don't think, aside from game devs getting together and effectively creating a union and having each other's backs, because they do seem to be a relatively tight-knit community, especially within genres, or like, say, in the indie genre. Those devs definitely seem to have each other's backs quite a lot. Granted, the indie scene is always a bit more ethical than not, so just by the nature of what they do.
Yeah. Not having, like, investors breathing down your neck and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's actually something we'll touch on later. In some regard, anyways. That is all I really have for this, without becoming redundant. Unless you have anything more you want to say.
I think I'm good.
Okay, so we can move on to the channel showcase, which this month I'm much more prepared, because I have been much more observant of smaller channels that happen across with less than 25,000 subs, and, you know, upload relatively frequently, and I see something special there. And this month is actually a channel that I think has a lot of potential, and they're probably going to grow very, very fast. When I first found them about a month ago-ish, I think a month ago. No, probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago now, because I found them from a video about Boston Uprising's Dreamcasper. But anyways, the channel's name is called Dividing by Zero. From what I've seen, it's mostly Overwatch satire videos, although today, as of recording this, which is the 23rd of April, I did see they posted a discussion video, which I will have more to critique in that regard, because I think their satire in particular is like spot on. There's very little I could critique about it until I saw the discussion thing. It's like, oh yes, that's my line of work, sort of. That's my expertise. You know, only been doing it for God knows how many years now. But yeah, I found this channel through a video about Boston Uprising's Dreamcasper after the whole debacle with that, and the video was basically like Dreamcasper's career ruined, my thoughts or whatever, something along those lines. And it was a little bit serious and a little bit satire, a good amount of satire. And the thing I really respect about this guy, and what makes me a little bit jealous, is that his delivery of his jokes and his comedy is like spot on. You know, I can write down jokes and they sound really good in my head, but I don't have the vocal delivery to pull them off. That's why whenever I try to do comedy on my channel, which is very rare, it's usually in the middle of more serious discussion, it's a more subtle and less bombastic, because that's what I can pull off vocally. But this guy, his earlier videos actually had text-to-speech, which is very common in, say, like Sirjohnmac, another relatively large channel. I haven't checked on him in a while, but he, last I saw, had like getting close to 200k. Probably has more than that now. But for the Dreamcasper video, apparently he had just started using his normal voice, and since then a lot of people said, like, you know, use your normal voice, because he has that delivery. That's one of the benefits, I think, of the text-to-speech, is that the delivery is so dry that it's almost funnier, depending on how you are. But I think this guy has a lot of potential to grow. Like I said, when I first found him a few weeks ago, he only had about 200 subs, right around the same sub count as me. And since then, he has about 870-ish subs as of, well, watching the new video today, which was, the video today was, that's another topic I'll get to in a second, but it was more like discussion-based. So up until today, the one critique I would have had is like audio editing, basically. Not so much like get a better microphone. I mean, like, hell, I'm using a fucking Blue Snowball. You know, that's not a high quality microphone, but I can make it sound much better than people who have, you know, like preamps and like all this crazy stuff, like non-USB microphones, like professional grade microphones. Sorry, kick my desk, but I can make it sound better. Maybe not for this, because the podcast is a little bit different because it's unscripted and all that, and God knows what happens. I kick my desk and all that. But if you go to any of my more scripted videos, it sounds really, really good in terms of audio quality. And that's one of the things that I pride my channel on. You know, the biggest important part of my videos is what I'm saying. So I slowly wanted to make sure that as I grew my channel and got better at what I was doing, that my audio editing was spot on. I think just throwing it into like Audacity, you know, free program, and doing some like equalization and compression would help a lot, in particular, because there are certain parts, and I know this because I've been there, where the audio suddenly changes, and you can tell it's the same microphone, but it sounds entirely different, and it's probably just like, you know, recorded at different times of day, because you can tell by the change in the voice, and it just sounds different. It's almost jarring, the, you know, instant change to, you know, maybe a deeper voice to a more strained voice because you've been talking, maybe even screwing up your script. That is one thing that I noticed he seems to be doing, because I don't really notice any fuck-ups in the middle of his dialogue. But I think in particular, the kind of audio editing I do with like equalization and compression, that's getting a little bit more advanced than I'd expect someone who just like picked up Audacity to figure out. You know, I've been at it for like two-ish years, and it took me about all that time to figure it out. But when you get better at audio editing, you can make it sound very crisp, and it sounds like you did it all in one sitting, even if you did it over the course of multiple days, which, you know, sometimes I have to do in particular. So I think that was the biggest and really only critique, because the editing was spot on, what he was saying was spot on. Again, he didn't really have any stumbling over his words. It sounded very scripted, it sounded very cohesive and concise. And actually, another thing that I thought was really impressive was, it kind of has to do with audio editing, but probably more so on the video editor side of things, which was he has music in the background. It is actually calibrated quite well. It's not too loud where it's distracting. It's not too soft where like I can't even hear it. It's honestly perfect, and I think he has a good selection of music in that regard, and that, you know, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but he seems to have gotten it relatively quickly, so that's nice. It definitely adds to the video as opposed to just talking. That's something I learned the hard way. Something I'm actually still trying to get better at. I think he's much better than me in that regard. And moving on to the video that was just today, more discussion-based instead of satire. It didn't really have any satire whatsoever, not really very much comedy, aside from maybe a few lines here or there, but it's more discussion and opinion-based. And that's very much in my territory. That's something that I've been doing for at least, 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was trying to move towards that with my channel. So his video that came out on the 23rd, today as of recording, was about burnout, specifically about effect and how the league should implement certain changes to help players' mentalities. And that's something that I think a lot of people agree on, myself included. However, I think there's a lot to be improved upon in this regard, because this is a topic that is actually extremely well researched, not so much in esports, but in regular sports, physical burnout as well as mental burnout, because and in discussion topics like this, I think it's incredibly useful to utilize a lot of these scientific studies, or just data if there are any, and in this case sports medicine is probably one of the most, if not the most lucrative form of medicine on the planet in terms of study. So you can imagine there are, and I know for a fact, there are a lot of published scientific papers, like peer-reviewed, the top of the best data that was basically at his fingertips, and he didn't really use anything like that. And that's fine. It's his first video that I've seen of him that had more opinion-based, more discussion-based, but I think that is something that you want to look for. Maybe, not every time you're going to be talking about like burnout for players, and there's going to be, piles upon piles of academic research papers that you can, have for the picking. But there is value in finding where what you're suggesting has worked in the past, and saying that it's not unreasonable for that to work in this case as well. One example would be, say, Path of Exile. That's a game that I critiqued back in, I think, October, and I basically said I love the game, I still love the game, but it had a lot of issues, and some of those issues could be solved by certain mechanics, and some of those mechanics are similar to, say, Diablo 3. Obviously, it's a big contention point, but other mechanics are similar to different games, maybe not even in the ARPG genre. But, and I said, like, well, these mechanics work here and here and here, and maybe even in Diablo, so they could definitely work here, because I believe that these are flawed in Path right now. And that's sorry, someone has a motorcycle fetish, apparently. But, yeah, even if the amount of data you have in those sort of discussions is relatively weak, it really depends on how you present it and utilize it to prove your point as much as possible. And there really wasn't any of that. Other than that, though, like, don't get me wrong, this channel is absolutely incredible. I expect them to grow way, way larger than they are right now. Like, I'd be shocked if within a month from now they aren't at least like 1,000, 1,500 subs. Yeah. Have anything to say, John? I know you checked out at least some of the videos.
Yeah, I checked out a couple of them. I definitely noticed on the microphone quality front, like, maybe just take like a couple inches back from the microphone and it won't, like, I only heard it max out like maybe 2 or 3 times total.
It's definitely a headphone mic or a headset mic.
Yeah.
It like, that's actually something I used to do too, way back in the day. But yeah, like with the headset mic, you want to sort of point it straight forward instead of like right on top of it. You don't want to be like eating your microphone. And you are right. I didn't really even say that, because I think a lot of people get the mistaken idea of like, oh, I need a higher quality microphone, you know, I need like at least a Blue Yeti, and that's like $120. No, like both of us actually, John and I, are both using Blue Snowball Ices, which is like the cheaper version of Blue Snowball because it doesn't have any options basically, and that's like $40, you know. And even that's not necessary. Nowadays, if I took my headset microphone, I could make it sound incredibly good. You know, maybe not as good as my Blue Snowball, because the better the microphone, the better you can make it sound, but with the right know-how, with a program like Audacity, you can make any microphone sound good. You know? So that's not really the issue. But yes, I think microphone placement in particular for the headset mic would help a little bit. It definitely, it'll add a little bit of echo, but it'll take away a little bit of the peaking and a little bit of the raspiness of the sound. Overall, it'll give you a cleaner sound, which if you know anything about audio editing, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, just don't ignore me. Just don't ignore me. Don't ignore me. Don't worry about it. That's what I was trying to say. But yeah, I think in terms of like the basic points to take away from this would be experiment on audio editing, especially Audacity, because it's free. That's just like the basic one I usually recommend to people. Can't beat free, you know. It's better than spending an amount of money, because you know, I've gotten it to work for me perfectly fine. And what was the other one? All right, the information. Get like actual data if you want to discuss things. If you're just doing the satire stuff, that's perfectly fine. Just go off on your own merry way, because I think in particular you're doing perfectly fine in that regard. You're much better than I could ever give any advice for. But yeah, like those two things have made things to work on. Other than that, well worth checking out if you like Overwatch, and particularly Overwatch League content. I think him and King Michael, which by the way just hit like 50-something thousand subs. Someday he's going to hit 100k. My guess is sometime towards the beginning of season 2. I open up YouTube and he's like right there on the first thing. Yeah, he's currently at 52,000 subs. Definitely deserved. Actually, I'm one of those subs. For a while, like when we first showcased him, I wasn't subscribed, but over time he slowly has gotten better. He still does things a little bit unscripted. He still has some of the issues, but I think he fixed a lot of them. Like, he doesn't digress so much anymore. So, yeah. That's all I've got for the channel showcase, unless you have something else.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay, so we can move on to the Where Are They Now, which this is actually quite interesting. About a year ago, I believe in January of 2017, we talked about a website organization called Fig. It's basically a Kickstarter alternative specifically for video games, where this is more business-oriented and investment-oriented. The original article, they had just secured about $7.8 million of investment to the website Fig itself to expand their reach. And basically what they do is a lot of game developers can apply to have their campaign on Fig to be funded, similar to Kickstarter. And Fig will go through and pick the ones that they see as the most viable to actually be kickstarted, or rather funded. It's not Kickstarter. So they're very selective about what games they choose, and I believe at the time they had like less than a dozen games total. The most lucrative of which at the time was Psychonauts 2, which raised over $3 million, and they were asking for about $3 million. Since then, the most lucrative I've seen is Pillars of Eternity 2, which asked for about $1 million and raised about $4-point-something million. So, you know, only 400 times the amount that they needed. And not only is Fig up and running still, but they are incredibly successful. They still don't have very many games, obviously, because I think they're still doing about less than a dozen per year. But I think the games that they have kickstarted, even the ones that are still ongoing, have a massive amount of support. You know, I found a game that still has about a month left, and they're asking for about 120k, and assuming the Kickstarter, the campaign rather, I'm going to keep saying Kickstarter by accident, assuming the campaign goes on for, 2 to 3 months, they've already raised about $30,000. That's much higher of a percentage and much more money than a partially funded campaign would ever get on Kickstarter. And, like, a lot of the games I've seen have been funded, some of which you can actually, like, some of the games it'll actually say, like, funded and released, and you can go and it'll, instead of say view campaign, it says view game. So they do consistently update their website to show successful campaigns. Now, the interesting part of this is not just that you can back it, but you can also become an investor. So you can decide to back the project and, be similar to Kickstarter where you just get certain rewards, or you can invest in it where you basically back it and you get a part of ownership, sort of like a stockholder, much like we were talking about before, where the developers do have to answer to someone, actually quite a lot of people, depending on how much they're asking for and how many people give. But it also is a more reliable way to make money, and it'll also allow for more business savvy people to be willing to invest money, because it doesn't feel like, I'm just paying money for a game that I want to play. No, I'm taking part in a business transaction. I'm, growing my own personal brand, blah, 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 whatever the hell investors like to hear. Which is exactly what this site is. And I actually had completely forgotten about this until I was scrolling through the old podcast, and I found Kickstarter Alternative or whatever, and I was like, oh yeah! And I looked it up, and they were still around, and sure enough, it's extremely successful still. And that's really nice to see. I think this is something that you're not really going to hear that much about, because it's more, back-end business-wise, but it is something that I think will make a large impact in the long run for a select few games that are likely to be very good. I mean, hell, Psychonauts 2. Psychonauts is a legendary game. I played it myself. I absolutely loved it, minus the last level. That was a pain in the ass because the checkpoints were a pain in the ass, but great game overall. Pillars of Eternity 2. I've never played Pillars of Eternity, but I've seen a lot about it. I've never heard anything bad about it, despite the many reviews that I've seen for it. And I've seen games of basically any style, from action RPGs to strategy-heavy, like turn-based games, to I even saw like a kind of game. It kind of looked like an action RPG, but it had like an anime style to it, which was actually the only one of that style that I saw on the website. I saw more indie-looking titles, and all of them, it's worth noting, the lowest amount that I saw any game asking for was about 120,000. So all of them are relatively ambitious projects, if you will, and the vast majority of them, actually all of them that I saw that were finished, were funded. I don't know if they, if a project fails, they take it off the website so you can't see that. I wouldn't blame them, because that's a very smart business move, although it could be considered shady if, consumers saw that. Although this is already the kind of site where the average consumer isn't going to go to.
Yeah.
So I don't think they'll ever get called out for that. If they are, and I wouldn't be able to tell either way. I'm sure if I went back to the old podcast where we talked about it, I'm sure there were some games there that we discussed where this game didn't get funded, and it's no longer on the website, but I don't care enough. That's how they run their business, as long as it's ethical, which I don't believe that would be unethical. Taking that a failed campaign off of the homepage, for example, or even off of their website, just so it doesn't take up space for potential new projects or success stories. I think that's fine. It's just sort of a public image thing. That's a PR thing. And I'm business savvy enough to understand that just has to be done, but maybe not flaunt that to the average consumer, because they don't exactly have a good track record with understanding business in general.
It's kind of cool to see a kind of almost premium Kickstarter type thing going on, where just like the buy-in point is so much higher than Kickstarter. I mean, I'm sure I don't know what Kickstarter or GoFundMe or any of those what the minimum can donate is?
With Kickstarter, the minimum you can donate is the first tier. So that depends on the project itself. With this, I believe it's... I think it was like at least 100 or so. Like, the minimum donation was much higher. I remember that being the case. Let me look it up. You know, I was about to say I regret Googling Fig, but sure enough, it's one of the first things that pops up. So, not the worst thing in the world. Invest. Here's how it works. Yeah, it doesn't say minimum amount.
I'm looking at the campaign for From Light, and if you want to just like do a pledge, the minimum is $9. But if you want to actually invest, the price per share is $1,000.
That makes sense because business.
Yeah.
You know, you are buying a share in a product, if not the company, but I think it's just the product. Yeah. That makes sense. And I'm sure... My guess is the similar to Kickstarter, the... whatchamacallit, the developers themselves can set the prices.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure the website, Fig, has, you know, recommended amounts, but I'm sure the developers can make that higher or lower if they please.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen that always seems, I guess, kind of silly in Kickstarters is, like, they'll have a minimum amount that's, like, $1 or 50 cents or something like that, and it's, like, you don't actually get anything, you just get, it'll say, like, Warm Fuzzies for helping us develop the game. And I've seen a bunch of different games on Fig, and, like, all of them, the minimum is just a pre-order. Like, it's $10 or $20, and, like, you actually get the game.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's not much more to say, but I think it is really cool what Fig is, I still think it's really cool what Fig is doing here, and it's really nice to see that they've been extremely successful. I mean, I think at the time, Psychonauts 2 was the only game that they had reached over 1 million for, and now they have something that's even surpassed that. Which, that's insane, like $4 million for a game. Like, I don't even know, is Pillars of Eternity even considered an indie game? Or is it just considered a game? It's definitely not AAA, but I don't know if it's considered indie.
I don't actually know.
Either way, it's successful. I don't really care about nor will ever have the desire to play Pillars of Eternity. I play enough top-down ARPGs, but I wish them all the best.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you have anything more to say?
Nothing that I can think of.
Do you have anything you want to ramble about, or do you think 50 minutes is long enough?
I was going... No.
We can discuss afterwards. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this podcast, and if you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. Links to my social media and whatnot, as well as John's social media and whatnot, as well as all of the references we have had throughout this video will be in the description below. First the references, actually no, first the timestamps, then the references, then John's, then mine at the very bottom, because you already know where my stuff is. It's my channel. Have any closing statements, John?
Butter waffles.
As good as any. So that's all the time we got for today. So until next time, don't die.